All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So today we're going to talk about something that I feel confuses a lot of people, specifically a lot of high achieving people, but almost no one prepares you for it. So the question that we're going to ponder today is it normal to feel lost after reaching a goal? A goal that you obviously have worked for, you sacrificed for, you visualized it, and you ultimately told yourself, when I get there, I'll finally feel dot, 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 right? Whether it's feeling successful, feeling settled, confident, secure, complete, or even relieved. And then you achieve it, right? You've got it. You achieve the promotion, you achieve the degree, the business milestone. Personally, it could be the marriage, the house, the fitness transformation, even the financial number. And instead of feeling fulfillment, you feel flat. There's a sense of restlessness. Maybe you feel a bit disoriented or even empty after achieving this goal. There's a plummet in motivation, so you're beginning to feel unmotivated. You may even start to feel a little depressed. And then the thought creeps in. What's wrong with me? So let me say this clearly. Yes, it is completely normal, but it's not random. So let's unpack it, right? Let's unpack why this happens. So clients will often come in and they'll say, I've achieved these wonderful things. And now I feel flat. The thing about goals is that goals give you structure, and structure organizes identity. And so when you're pursuing something, your nervous system has direction, essentially. So you wake up with purpose. You have measurable progress markers. There's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of completedness. There's a storyline that you follow almost every day. And essentially, when thinking about that storyline, it's like, I am becoming this thing. And so the storyline is going to ultimately regulate you. It gives your days meaning. And when a goal is finally reached, that organizing force ultimately disappears. And so the thing that met you day to day every morning has now been accomplished. It's been reached. The pursuit ends. The tension to achieve that goal drops off, and the narrative essentially collapses. And so suddenly there's this open psychological space. And open space can feel what most people put is an experience of like anxiety, a sense of emptiness, a loss of direction, and the big question of like, well, now what? Now what do I do? And it's not that the goal was wrong, essentially. It's that sorry, I'm having some technical issues here. So it's not that the goal was wrong, essentially. It's that the pursuit of that goal was carrying more identity weight than you actually realized. And so, unfortunately, what happens then is like achievement, since achievement's been met, there's no longer this kind of this distraction. And so many people unknowingly use ambition, I think, as emotional anesthesia. And that's one of my favorite sayings to people is that, when we're in a pursuit of our goal, it can be so distracting that we ultimately put so much of our identity and self into it that we're kind of missing out on the awareness of what's going to happen when we do meet that goal. And so if I stay focused on achieving, I don't have to feel, and I hear that often, I don't have to feel loneliness. I don't have to experience self-doubt, don't have to experience relationship dissatisfaction. Fear of inadequacy diminishes, existential uncertainty diminishes. So this goal for many people ultimately come this container. And so when it's gone, these unresolved internal material essentially resurfaces. And so now we're left to having to deal with what was unfinished, right? So now that there's no milestone to chase, there's no benchmark. So there's no dopamine hit, there's no adrenaline hit. It's now just you again. And sometimes that confrontation with self can really feel quite destabilizing and can often rob one's sense of satisfaction from the very goal that they accomplished. And so from a neurological perspective, that pursuit, again, is like releasing this dopamine, right? Because when I think about anticipation is powerful. Achievement gives a spike, but it is brief. And that's the thing about the brain, and the unfortunate part of how our brain works is that there's a baseline reset. Anytime we hit this peak of dopamine, our brain does this awful thing where it wants to reset our dopamine, essentially. And so that reset can feel like an emotional deflation, a loss of excitement, a loss of purpose, kind of this overarching kind of message of like, that's it. And so you thought the finish line would feel like a transformation. And often things are transformed, but instead it now feels like a Tuesday. And that doesn't mean that the goal didn't matter. It means that the dopamine is built for pursuit, not for permanence. And so, you've reached this definition, but along the way, you didn't update your identity. And so here's something subtle but critical, right? So external achievement does not automatically produce internal integration. So you can become a partner, you can become a parent, you can become a CEO, you can become financially successful, you can even become physically transformed, but internally still feel very much a sense of insecurity, imposter syndrome, like a sense of uncertainty, even feeling behind and just generally unsettled. And so if your inner architecture hasn't evolved alongside the achievement itself, the success more likely is going to feel very dissonant. And so you arrive at the goal, but psychologically you haven't caught up. And so you feel lost in your own success, which is why so many successful people that I work with are so defined by their success. But once it is achieved, this is where the inner narratives that they have essentially been avoiding start to come forward. Obviously, people, when I talk with successful people, they've confused achievement with meaning. Obviously, achievement is achievable or measurable, but meaning is really experiential. So achievement answers, right? There's a few things that achievement's going to answer. It's like, did I accomplishment, right? A meaning answer, right? So they're going to say, does this align with who I am becoming? Sometimes the loss you feel isn't about the goal being over. It's actually about realizing this didn't give me what I thought it would. And so the realization can actually be quite destabilizing because now you have to confront this deeper question, or many questions for that matter, is what actually matters to me? Who am I outside of striving and success? And what do I want beyond validation? And so you've been in next mode, as I quote it, right? So next mode for too long. And that's where high performers often live in this chronic forward motion where they're constantly stacking the next thing, the next milestone, the next promotion, the next phase of something, the next benchmark of something. And so when there's no quote next, the silence becomes quite uncomfortable. And so this stillness feels foreign, and rest actually feels unearned. And contentment feels suspicious to most. And so instead of integrating the achievement, folks immediately scan for the next ladder, right? And it's so important to integrate that, to sit with that. And if you don't, the sense of feeling lost can can come quite quickly, because sometimes that lost feeling isn't dysfunction. It's actually transition. And so for those of you who are listening and taking this into consideration, there's a growth threshold to be had, essentially. And so, feeling lost after a goal is often a signal of identity expansion, if you pay attention to it. And so you've closed one chapter, but the next chapter hasn't fully formed, and that's common. So that in between space feels ambiguous, and for most of us, ambiguity triggers anxiety. But that ambiguity is also where reinvention can happen. Doesn't mean that you make another goal, right? So reinvention happens in ambiguity. And so this is the psychological space where you might ask yourself, was I chasing this because I wanted it, or because I thought I should? Or who am I when I'm not proving something? And that's not regression, that's maturation. These are important questions to ask yourself after you've accomplished something so important to you, but now you're left feeling that sense of emptiness. So is it normal? The answer to that, again, is yes, especially for those who are high achievers, identity-driven professionals, athletes after competition cycles, entrepreneurs after exits, graduates after their degrees, and leaders after achieving milestones. And so the issue isn't that you feel lost. The issue is what you do next. And so do you panic and immediately chase something? Most people, yes. We'll also talk about burnout in another episode. But oftentimes there's this kind of anxiety and immediately chasing something else. Or do you pause and you integrate, which is what I'm suggesting. And so some healthier responses to consider is, instead of asking, why don't I feel amazing? You ask yourself, what is this moment inviting me to examine? Maybe it's inviting slower pacing. Maybe it's inviting a deeper alignment. Maybe it's inviting an identity recalibration or an emotional integration, or even more relational focus, or even more meaning-driven goals. Loss doesn't always mean broken. And sometimes it means your old identity container is really too small. And so this is an opportunity that you can expand. And so before we close, there's 3 reflection questions that I'd like to ask. So the first question is, when you achieved your last goal, did you actually pause to integrate it? Or did you immediately set the next one? The second question is, if achievement stopped being your primary source of identity, who would you be? And the third is the discomfort you feel emptiness, or is it transition, right? So be honest with yourself. And so if this conversation resonates with you, especially if you're a high-performing professional, navigating identity shifts or career milestones or post-achievement, this is exactly the psychological integration work I explore more deeply with folks. And so on my YouTube channel, I break down the intersection between achievement, identity, and leadership psychology, obviously emotional regulation, particularly for individuals, for ambitious individuals, should I say, who appear successful externally, but might feel unsettled internally. And on LinkedIn, you can follow me. I discuss how this dynamic impacts executives, to founders, to leaders, because post-goal disorientation often shows up as burnout, as I mentioned before. It can show up as disengagement or even impulsive decision-making, not just at the personal level, but the organizational level as well. And on Facebook, you can join me. I continue, these live discussions in a more conversational, practical format. And so if you want deeper frameworks around your identity, development, strategy alignment and adaptive growth after success, please subscribe, follow, and stay connected. Remember, achievement is a milestone. Integration is maturity. And I'll see you guys next time.